the day Julian held a celebration for the unforgettable first love who had once bullied him. The system deemed my mission a failure. That woman had destroyed his family, almost landing him in jail, yet Julian would still ruin my hand for her, letting her take my place and claim the glory that was rightfully mine. Starting over, the system asked me, "Would you like to change your target this time?" I nodded. And so, on that rainy night, I chose not to save him, but he showed up anyway, drenched to the bone. He stared intently at the man standing next to me, his voice trembling. "You always cared about me the most." Chapter 1. Julian and Angelica attended the celebration together, while I was confined in a villa, watching the entire event unfold via livestream, in a perfectly tailored black suit that accentuated his long legs. Julian's proportions on screen were immaculate. Standing beside him, Angelica smiled as she answered the reporter's questions. When asked why she created HE, Angelica paused for a moment. Then, turning her head toward Julian, she slipped her arm around his and said, "The person I'm most grateful to is also the one I owe the most. So, I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to him." Everyone caught the implication in her words. Under the spotlight, Julian's brow furrowed slightly, but he said nothing more. He didn't push her away. On the large screen behind them, that painting appeared at the perfect moment. I shifted my gaze from Julian to the painting, momentarily dazed. It was the best painting I'd ever created, and also my last. After I finished it, Julian destroyed my hand. Angelica, standing at his side, still wore that aloof expression, but she had learned to show vulnerability in front of Julian. She'd said, "Julian, as long as she can keep painting, I'll never reach the top. You'll help me, won't you?" So Julian destroyed my hand, to prevent me from interfering. He even kept me imprisoned for 2 years. And now, Angelica was using my work to stand in that place of honor. How laughable. I forced a smirk, looking away, unwilling to watch any further. The system then confirmed that I'd failed my mission yet again. Am I going to be erased? Despite my usual fear of death, I found an unexpected calm as I said this. "No," the system replied after a brief silence. "There's one final chance. This time, would you like to change your target?" I hesitated. "She's an exceptional artist. I'm sure she'll go far." Julian's voice cut in at that moment. His words sounded neutral, professional, but as he spoke, his gaze lingered on the painting behind him. Everyone assumed he was talking about Angelica. I looked at Julian and, unexpectedly, found myself laughing. Of course. Chapter 2. To stay alive. I had to complete the mission. I tried to win over Julian 6 times, each attempt ending in failure. By the 6th time, I thought I might finally succeed. But then Julian's unforgettable first love, Angelica, returned from abroad. Even though this spoiled heiress had once destroyed his family and nearly sent him to prison, Julian still chose her the moment she reappeared. So, on my 7th attempt, I didn't hesitate to change my target. "Whoever wants to be a simp for this fool can go ahead, I'm done. This time, your target is Jack He." The name Jack immediately brought an image to mind, bold red hair and almond-shaped eyes that should have looked inviting but always held an edge of irritation. I paused, choosing my words carefully. If I remember right, isn't he not particularly into girls? Since I had stuck with Julian through his rise from rock bottom, I'd naturally met quite a few people around him. The He family was an unshakable force, so Jack was well protected. I'd seen Jack a handful of times, but in each of those encounters, his attitude toward me was less than friendly. I later learned that he was like that with all women. Julian, though, wasn't fond of the young He family heir. He would tell me to keep my distance from Jack. "I don't like the way he looks at you." I used to think he was jealous, so even though I didn't think Jack was particularly threatening, I happily agreed to Julian's demand, until I saw Julian, in a fit of jealousy, beat up a suitor hanging around Angelica. Then I finally understood. It wasn't jealousy, it was pure possessiveness. Julian didn't want anyone touching what he considered his. "This is your last chance," the system said, breaking a long silence. "Good luck." "Fine by me," I shrugged. "As long as it's not Julian again." Chapter 3. Jack was hard to approach. Though we attended the same school, The Young-hee family scion skipped class so frequently that I could hardly catch him. Even when I did spot him, Jack was always surrounded by friends and admirers. Unlike the solitary Julian, Jack seemed to have an almost excessive amount of social capital. I also ran into Julian a few times, but the timing always seemed off, as I would invariably catch him being bullied. Angelica and her followers orchestrated most of these incidents. This spoiled princess seemed to find amusement in tormenting Julian. One time, I watched her have her goons punch and kick Julian before pressing a cigarette butt into his neck. "If you stick with me, maybe your parents will have an easier time." Angelica sneered. "What do you think?" The Fu family business was dependent on the Lee family, so Julian had been taught from a young age not to defy Angelica Lee. He kept his head down, silent. Angelica waited for what felt like an eternity. She was just about to say something else when Julian suddenly looked up. No, his voice was hoarse, his tone disturbingly calm. He said this, his gaze passing over Angelica to settle directly on me. I blinked, surprised, before quickly regaining my composure. Julian had noticed me. "I won't agree," he repeated, his gaze drifting back to Angelica with an expression of utter disgust. "You make me sick." This was a conversation I hadn't encountered in any of my previous attempts. Maybe because every time before, I had rushed in to protect Julian, leaving me no chance to see what would happen afterward. But this time, I chose to ignore it. "I swear he has a masochistic streak." I muttered to the system. "He's been bullied to this extent and still feels something for Angelica." Seriously, the system offered some reassurance. "It doesn't matter. We're not here for him this time. No need to complete that mission anymore." As I turned to leave, I didn't notice Julian's gaze lingering on me once again. Chapter 4. Since I couldn't get close to Jack, I decided to enjoy the long-lost experience of a normal college life. Before, my entire world revolved around Julian. In that sense, Jack actually makes for a pretty decent target. I mused. The system remained silent but soon provided me with an opportunity to approach Jack. On his mother's Memorial Day, Jack would be injured in a reckless car accident. Looking up at the gloomy sky, I found myself dazed for a moment. I really disliked going out in the rain, but in each of those 6 previous times, I'd forced myself to go out into the storm, suppressing my own unease and fear to find Julian. On this day, Angelica would force Julian to look for a necklace she had purposely thrown away. Julian's health was fragile. After a night of rain, he developed a high fever, nearly costing him his life. I tried to stop him and even tried to drag him away, but I'd failed each time. So, I had ended up helping him search for that necklace 6 times, each time watching as he clutched it tightly to his chest. "It's all in the past now," the system said. "You need to find Jack." I nodded. "I know." So, I opened my umbrella and took a completely different path from those 6 previous attempts. Chapter 5. I hadn't expected that. Aside from his bad temper, Jack also had a massive ego. When I found him, the front of his car was crushed, and he was nearly passing out. Yet, he stubbornly mustered enough strength to threaten me. "Don't tell anyone about this." And with that, he fainted, scaring me into calling an ambulance immediately. Luckily, his injuries weren't severe. His leg was hurt, and he'd fainted due to his hemophobia. In light of this, I decided to keep my silence. But this was a rare chance to get closer to Jack, so I didn't leave. Instead, I sat quietly outside his hospital room, waiting until a pair of soaking wet shoes suddenly appeared in my line of sight. Startled, I looked up, only to meet a pair of dark, unyielding eyes. Eyes so dark, they seemed to absorb all light. It was Julian, the one who should have been searching for the necklace. He stared at me, unblinking, then his gaze moved past me, settling directly on the open hospital room door. "You went to find him." Julian's tone was matter-of-fact. He paused, then spoke softly. "So, you chose him." I frowned slightly, sensing something was off. But the next second, Julian's eyes grew red. He instinctively reached out, his hand trembling as he tried to hold on to me, his voice barely audible. "You used to care about me the most." Chapter 6. 6 failed attempts at the mission had given me plenty of time to witness many sides of Julian. He was typically indifferent, and the rare moments he showed emotion were always for Angelica. But I had never seen Julian like this. He clung to my wrist, as if holding on to something that could keep him going just a little longer. The phrase lifeline suddenly sprang to mind. But how could that be? I forced a smile, glancing at Julian's hand gripping my wrist with indifference. This person, after all, had always been the most ruthless toward me. I tried to shake off Julian's hand, but I couldn't. So I tilted my head and looked at him with a perfectly measured blend of surprise and annoyance. Who are you? Who are you? I'm the one here to save you. I'd had this conversation with Julian 5 times before. The system had told me that someone like Julian, trapped in darkness, would be more easily drawn to those who could save him. So, I'd followed its advice and attempted 5 times to win him over. Then I learned, through those failed attempts, one undeniable truth. Julian would only drag those around him deeper into the darkness. He never wanted anyone to save him. All he wanted was to watch people rot in that dark corner, just like him. So, on the 6th attempt, I ignored the system's urging and coldly watched as Julian was trampled underfoot. Then I proceeded to stomp on those same people, grinning at Julian. You're welcome to use me, just like this. Who are you? I'm the one who'll stand beside you. It turned out that Julian responded better to this approach. So, the 6th attempt was the longest I'd ever lasted. But it still failed. Julian's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked at him instinctively. Those 6 attempts had taught me a lot. For example, by now, I was quite the actor. Julian believed that I truly didn't recognize him this time. I watched as a spark of light seemed to ignite in the depths of his eyes. He pressed his lips together, attempting to give me a faint smile. I'm the one who'll stand. What are you two doing at my door? Chapter 7. Jack was an incredibly brash person. You could see it in the way he, with an injured leg, leaned on crutches and still tried to point one at Julian to assert dominance. But he forgot that his leg was still injured. So Jack stumbled and fell. I instinctively shook off Julian's hand to help him. This time, Julian couldn't stop me. Who are you? Jack mumbled, looking down, and instinctively tried to push me away. Who gave you permission to? His words caught in his throat. He stared at me, stunned, before muttering under his breath. Damn, this little thing is exactly my type. I was speechless. Little thing? Who was he talking about? Hang in there. The system comforted me. This is your last shot at the mission. So I forced a smile and held back. I'm the one who saved you. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Julian freeze at my words. I focused on Jack, extending my hand. Your rescue fee and a confidentiality fee. For looking like that, let's say 2,500. Jack's face flushed red, then purple with rage. I thought he was mad because I was using the situation to squeeze money from him. But he surprised me. I'm only worth 2,500? Jack pointed at himself in disbelief but quickly looked away when his gaze met mine. The tips of his ears turned red. He coughed, his voice dropping lower. At least add a couple of zeros to that. This development was unexpected. I fell silent. Then, turning to the system, I sighed. You know, if you'd made Jack my target sooner, would we have needed to waste so much time and so many attempts? The system was silent too. Chapter 8. Jack couldn't stand for long. So, I rolled up my sleeves, ready to help him back to bed. Just as I was wondering whether I should change my approach with Jack, Julian suddenly spoke up. Jack. His gaze drifted coolly past me, settling on Jack. His tone businesslike. Are you returning to the dorm tonight? Return to the dorm? Jack raised an eyebrow, gesturing to his injured leg. Do I look like I can make it back like this? Julian nodded. Staying out overnight, I'll mark it down. It took me a moment to realize that Julian was the student council president. The school regularly checks the dorms, and staying out without permission could impact final evaluations if it happened often enough. Jack looked utterly unfazed, though he could easily argue that he had a legitimate reason to stay out. Then Julian turned to me. He quickly masked his emotions. What about you? She's obviously going back. Before I could respond, Jack cut in. His tone was still laced with irritation. The girl's only late because she brought me to the hospital. Right, President Fu? You're not heartless enough to mark her down for that, are you? Julian said nothing, simply watching me in silence. I avoided his gaze, frowning slightly at Jack. Are you going to be okay on your own? A man can't say he's not okay. Jack corrected me, frowning in mock indignation. Without his crutches, he hopped on one leg and snatched my phone from my pocket, nodding at me to unlock it. If you're going to charge, at least be thorough about it. Jack grinned, smoothly inputting his number. When you come to collect, remember to have a payment code ready. My number's also my WeChat, so don't forget to add me later. I couldn't quite keep up with his rhythm, and he nudged me forward a few steps. All right, back to school with you, and thanks for today. As I left, I heard Jack mutter, obvious honor student, can't go messing with her scholarship. I paused mid-step. Chapter 9. Jack was right, I did need that scholarship. The system had given me a background far from affluent, so I relied on part-time jobs and scholarships to get by. Once, I'd asked the system, if the goal was to win over Julian, why couldn't I have a strong enough background to compete with Angelica? The system paused before replying. It would be too obvious, and I soon understood. Before being transported to this world, I'd been an ordinary girl, just finishing my college entrance exams. The college life I'd longed for was happening in this strange, unfamiliar world. Julian and Angelica's world was entirely separate from mine. I'd never been part of their world. Thrown in by force, I was bound to slip up. In a way, my repeated failures were inevitable. Without a protagonist's aura, I could only rely on myself. Through these cycles, I memorized the critical events, though I knew not to depend on these ever-shifting histories. So, with each attempt, I studied and learned, becoming like a sponge absorbing knowledge. The first time, I barely lasted 10 days. By the 6th time, I lasted 10 years. Only through such preparation could I confidently say to Julian in the 6th attempt, "You can use me however you want." Though I still failed in the end. Was it painful? Yes, very. But I wanted to go home so badly. Chapter 10. At the corner. I glanced back almost instinctively. Jack was still by the door. He leaned against the frame, waving at me when he saw me look back, only to be quickly shooed back inside by a passing nurse. I couldn't help but smile. Julian and Jack were complete opposites. Julian's gaze was always on me, heavy with emotions that felt suffocating. I was aware of it but could pretend I didn't notice. After all, no matter what he felt, he was no longer my concern. I'll handle it, the system assured me. He won't interfere with your mission. When Julian came to me and said those things, I realized that he'd been reborn in this timeline. This had never happened before. I nodded, then asked out of curiosity, "How will you handle it?" "I'll erase all of his memories," I faltered, unconsciously slowing my steps. "What's wrong?" Julian's voice was raspy as he asked. He deliberately slowed his pace to stay half a step behind me. "President Fu." I turned to him with a friendly smile, feigning curiosity. "Do you know me?" Julian's expression wavered for a moment. Then he responded, "At the opening ceremony, your speech was excellent. When I first entered college, I'd given a speech as an outstanding student in front of the whole school." Julian coughed quietly after he finished. His clothes were still soaked, and now his pale face held a faint, sickly flush. A passing nurse saw him and couldn't help but ask, "Shouldn't you change into dry clothes? You'll get sick if you don't." Julian didn't respond. He merely continued looking at me, a hint of hope glimmering in his eyes. I smiled but didn't even bother to offer a polite response to encourage him. I watched as the light in Julian's eyes faded, bit by bit. Just as he was about to speak, I cut him off. "By the way, are you close with Jack?" Julian's breath hitched. He whispered the name, and a shadow seemed to darken around him. I pretended not to notice and rubbed my phone thoughtfully, smiling. "Yes, I think I'll pursue His hand clenched at his side, knuckles turning white as he forced a smile. "Sophia, you're joking, right?" This time, I looked at Julian in silence. I watched him fumble for words, his gaze skittering away, utterly flustered. Then I smiled back, contradicting him. "I'm not joking, President Fu. I've realized I fell for at first sight. I'm serious, and I'm ready to go after him." Julian said nothing. Under the pretense of needing to change clothes, he fled from my unyielding stare. I watched his retreating figure, nearly laughing. No need to erase anything. I told the system he won't affect me, because I wanted Julian to remember. I wanted him to witness, clear-eyed, as Sophia walked further and further away from the depths of Julian's shadow. The system didn't agree, nor did it refuse. It only said something unexpected as I walked away. You've changed. I shrugged. Even a clay figure has some fire in them. And this was, after all, my last chance. Chapter 11. If winning over Julian was a nightmare, then Jack was nothing short of an angel. Even a casual online chat seemed to boost his affection for me by several points. Sometimes, I even had the surreal feeling that if I just stood still, Jack would make his way over to me on his own. But this thought only lingered briefly. After all, he was still stuck in the hospital with his injured leg. When I visited Jack at the hospital, his room was always packed with people. His popularity was almost excessive. Jack's friends would always smirk knowingly when they saw me, teasing but without malice. In contrast, Julian's circle had always thought I was unworthy of him. To them, I was just a thief taking advantage of Angelica's absence. Unbothered, I walked in and placed a bouquet of flowers on the table. This brash young master, usually unfazed by his friends' teasing, only blushed slightly when he saw me. He cleared his throat and looked at the bouquet with a slight frown. Next time, don't bring pointless stuff like this. Before I could respond, he paused. Perhaps realizing he'd spoken too curtly, he started to explain himself. I didn't mean, all right. I hadn't taken it to heart. After dealing with Julian, I was more than used to this tone. So should I bring more fruit next time? Jack's friends exploded with laughter. Phew, she's such a thoughtful sister-in-law. Sis, don't let he keep that temper of his unchecked. You gotta train him well. I glanced at Jack and found him staring back at me, his eyes flashing with annoyance. I froze, unsure what had irritated him. Sensing my arrival, his friends said their goodbyes with exaggerated winks before slipping out, even thoughtfully closing the door behind them. I opened my mouth to ease the tension, but Jack shuffled over in bed, patting the spot next to him. I looked at the empty chair nearby. Jack folded his arms, raising an eyebrow. Didn't you say in front of Julian that you were gonna chase me? Then he sighed heavily, looking at me with a mix of frustration and disappointment, as if to say, this is your idea of making a move? I was at a loss for words. I hadn't expected Jack to know about the line I'd used to rile Julian, but I didn't hesitate and sat next to him. It amused me to see that, for all his bravado, Jack's whole body stiffened, and the tips of his ears turned red. The mouthy king of denial, pure-hearted young master. I must have stared at his flushed ear tips for too long because he raised a hand to cover them, giving me an annoyed look and hastily changing the subject. Did he give you a hard time that day? No, I replied, shaking my head. Jack scoffed and leaned closer to murmur, stay away from that jerk. I'm pretty sure he's got some mental issues. To the world, Julian always presented a calm, polished persona. Everyone thought of Julian as a model student, a responsible leader. But Jack, I watched him disparage Julian in front of me, speaking with unfiltered disdain, as if he had plenty of evidence to back his claims. Doesn't his throat get dry? For once, even the system chimed in with a sarcastic tone. Realizing, I nodded, standing to fetch the water from the bedside table. Jack was still going on, and without thinking, he leaned forward to take a sip when I handed him the cup. From my angle, I could see the curls in his hair bobbing with his movements. They looked soft, even inviting to touch. I couldn't help but imagine what his reaction might be if I reached out to ruffle them, and I had to suppress a laugh. What are you laughing at? Jack looked up, confused and slightly annoyed. You think I'm funny? No, I think you're absolutely right, I replied, grinning. Please, go on. I love listening. Jack huffed, but I noticed a smug glint in his eyes. As I was about to leave, he called after me, rubbing the back of his neck. He seemed conflicted before finally blurting out, "See, could you come by tomorrow?" I rarely turned down requests from my target, so, of course, I agreed. Jack looked even more conflicted. his expression a mix of bravado and vulnerability. This made me curious about what he was planning. It had been a long time since I'd felt excited for tomorrow to come. Chapter 12. The next day. I arrived at the hospital a little early. Before I even reached Jack's room, I could hear a woman's voice scolding him. Doctors and nurses passed by, barely reacting, though a few paused to remind her, "Please keep your voice down in the hospital." Jack was getting quite an earful. With his head hung low, his usually perky curls looked wilted, and he seemed, frankly, a bit pitiful, not wanting to interrupt. I hesitated in the doorway. It was Jack's brother-in-law who noticed me first, gently nudging Jack's sister to stop. "You must be the young lady who helped Jack the other day?" Jack's sister immediately softened, greeting me with a smile that reminded me a bit of Angelica's. I noticed Jack glance up at me, a look of relief and joy crossing his face. So he'd asked me here to save him from a scolding. Reading his intentions, I smiled and nodded. Jack's sister, Sandra, was the current head of the He family. When the He family faced a crisis, she had stepped up, carrying the entire family on her shoulders. For me, Sandra was a figure of respect and admiration. Once, I had aspired to be like her. To Jack, Sandra was a mother figure in every sense. He acted fearless around everyone else but turned into an obedient little chick around her. Sandra thanked me profusely. Jack tried to interject a few times, only to be silenced by her stern glare. Watching him squirm under Sandra's gaze, I couldn't hold back a smile. But seeing Jack with Sandra also made me ache for home again. Lowering my gaze, I schooled my expression, silently reminding myself, "It's okay, Sophia, you'll be home soon." Chapter 13. Sandra was a busy woman. She stayed in Jack's hospital room for only a brief time before leaving, but not before slipping me a personal business card. I glanced down, momentarily stunned by the embossed gold lettering. Jack reached over and gave me a light but playful smack on the head. "If you like these so much, I'll print a whole stack for you next time." He smirked, a hint of jealousy in his tone. "You really admire my sister." "Huh? Who wouldn't admire CEO He?" I carefully tucked the card into my bag, smiling at Jack. "I want to be someone who shines like her." Jack froze. Whatever was going through his mind made his face turn as red as a boiled lobster. He stammered, Then do you understand why I asked you to come today?" Years of mission experience had taught me to be cautious. So I ventured. "To help you handle your sister's scolding?" The blush on Jack's face froze, and he shot me an exasperated look before turning away. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm not as unapproachable as you think." I stared at him, surprised, recalling the image of him being thoroughly scolded earlier. It certainly didn't make him look all that intimidating. "You don't need to go out of your way or belittle yourself to pursue me," Jack continued, his back still turned to me as his words tumbled out faster. "Like yesterday, you brought flowers to be nice. But my tone was rude. You should have called me out on it. I'm not the type who can't take criticism. If you said something, I'd definitely change. You can be yourself around me, even if you're trying to win me over." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. In my previous missions, I'd lowered myself constantly, bending to Julian's every demand in the hopes of making him like me. I never turned Julian down, not even when he destroyed my hand for Angelica's sake. So people looked down on me, mocking me as a simp behind my back. Even the system had said, "It's okay, just endure it. Once you succeed, you can go home. Just bear with it a little longer." But no one ever told me that, "Sophia, even if you're forced into these missions, you can still be yourself." Chapter 14. When Jack finally finished, he turned to look at me. He must have been startled by my teary eyes, because he immediately panicked. He clumsily tried to explain. I didn't mean to criticize you. I mean, you're fine as you are. It's just, I think you're being too hard on yourself." His voice trailed off until he fell silent, quietly peeling an apple. He was surprisingly good at it, managing to peel the whole apple without breaking the skin. "Want some?" I nodded, taking a bite. It was sweet. As sweet as the sugar water my grandmother used to make. Perhaps out of guilt, Jack insisted on hopping along on one foot to see me out. I knew he was trying to make me laugh with his clumsy act. He was strong and balanced enough to pull it off, so I couldn't help but chuckle at his wobbling. "Jack," I said suddenly, spreading my arms. "Can I hug you?" Jack stumbled, genuinely caught off guard. After a moment, he scoffed to cover his embarrassment. "If you want a hug, just do it. Why ask?" Despite his bravado, he opened his arms and hopped over to me, muttering, "Here, take your hug." I laughed as I hugged him. Then his voice sounded from above me, proud and slightly smug. "Feel free to explore. There aren't many with a build like mine at a university. Especially not Julian." I could knock him out in one punch. He seemed to take every chance to put Julian down and lift himself up. So I indulged him, pretending to brush over a few areas casually. As expected, Jack blushed, but he tried to maintain his composure, though it was clear he wanted me to keep praising him. I was just about to humor him when, from the corner of my eye, I noticed someone standing in the shadows. It was Julian. Chapter 15. He stood hidden from the light, staring at Jack and me with a look of profound despair, as if he were bracing himself for death. Then he began to cough violently, as if the force of his misery was tearing him apart. But Julian's eyes remained fixed on me. The desperation in his gaze almost made me think I'd succeeded in the 6th attempt. But what difference would that have made? Jack noticed him too. He instinctively tried to pull me behind him, but I stopped him. "Rest up," I said, reassuring Jack. "Once your leg heals, I'd love for you to be my model." Jack straightened his back immediately, his broad chest puffing out so much it practically pushed me away. I sighed internally. "Fine. If it makes you happy, don't worry. I'll get myself back in shape." Jack's voice rang out loud and clear. He threw a triumphant look in Julian's direction, then urged me to head back. I knew Julian had heard him. Last time, around this time of year, I'd asked Julian to be my model. He'd agreed initially, but then chose to model for Angelica when she'd complained. In the end, Angelica won that competition, gaining a prize she hardly needed and a spot she already had. And I was left with nothing. Chapter 16. Julian followed me out of the hospital. I could hear him coughing, a harsh, bloody sound, but I never looked back. Not until I reached the fountain in the hospital square did I stop. I remembered something from so long ago that I had nearly forgotten. In the first mission, I thought Julian hated Angelica, until one day I bumped into him, and a small bell he was holding fell into this fountain. It was the only time I'd ever seen Julian lose his composure, frantically diving into the murky water to search for that bell. Later, I found out that the bell was something Angelica had tossed aside and gifted him out of pity, and yet he treasured it. Because of that, the system had quickly marked that attempt as a failure. So Julian, how could I believe that you would ever genuinely care about me? Suddenly, a quarreling couple nearby snapped me out of my thoughts. The woman threw her ring into the fountain in a fit of anger, and the man jumped in after it without hesitation. For a moment, his figure overlapped with Julian's in my mind. I thought I had a chance. Julian's voice came from behind me. He struggled to control the tremor in his voice, then spoke softly, sounding almost broken. "Why are you avoiding every chance we have to see each other?" I didn't answer. Instead, I turned to face Julian, watching as the despair left his expression, replaced by that familiar, bitter resentment. "It's because of Jack, isn't it?" Julian's tone was flat, as if making an observation. "Because of him, you stopped caring about me, didn't you?" He stared at me with such intensity that I felt he'd tear Jack out of this world if I nodded. So I laughed. "Julian," I said, calling his name. The art and finance departments rarely share classes. Julian's whole body froze. He seemed to sense what was coming, his face paling as he took a few steps forward, trying to stop me. "No, you thought those encounters were chance, but every time, I went out of my way to seek information, asking your friends, your classmates, even your club members where you might be, creating every coincidence with effort. I worked tirelessly to be in your world, hoping you'd look up and see me, even if you didn't see my face. I'd be somewhere in the background, sometimes even wearing a costume." Something clicked in Julian's mind. His hand, hovering just inches from my face, froze, and he dared not reach out. I continued with a smile. Do you remember, Julian? The time Angelica dragged you to an amusement park, and a clown handed you a balloon? That was me. In one of the many attempts, I'd found out Angelica had forced Julian on a date to an amusement park. I worried something might go wrong, so I followed them, but I didn't want my presence to annoy Julian, so I took a part-time job as a clown. As expected, Angelica made him ride the drop tower. Julian's fear of heights was severe, but he got on. At first, I thought he was just enduring it because of his family situation, but later, I realized Julian was strong enough that if he truly didn't want to do something, Angelica couldn't make him. He did it because he liked her. After getting off, Julian, pale as a ghost, sat on a bench. Angelica, bored, left him there. Seizing the chance, I approached and handed Julian a balloon, putting on my best clown act to cheer him up, but he never smiled. He only stared blankly at me as I acted. For a moment, I thought he'd recognized me. Then Angelica came to fetch him. As he left, he thanked me. I watched him walk back to Angelica, and the balloon in his hand ended up in the nearest trash can. Julian had always been indifferent toward things he didn't care about. It's not like that. Julian's voice trailed off, as if realizing his excuses were meaningless, so he pressed his lips together, a look of helpless despair crossing his face. And then I said, Julian, I remember everything. Julian's coughing fit returned, each one racking his body, his hand coming up to cover his red-rimmed eyes. Sophia, please stop joking. It was the second time he told me that, but I had never joked with Julian, so I looked him in the eyes and said, clearly and firmly, Julian, you truly love Angelica. You loved her enough for me to fail 6 times. I understand that now, so I'm letting you go, can't I? Chapter 17. Julian's no lingered on his lips, neither spoken nor swallowed. Though the summer night was warm, he shivered. Finally, he pulled a small cloth pouch from his pocket, holding it in his trembling hands as he offered it to me. You once said I could make a wish with this, he said softly. I glanced down. It was a clear amber stone, with a cicada, long entombed, encased within. During my 6th attempt to win him over, Julian and I had taken a trip together. We'd visited a remote forest, and I'd found that amber stone by chance, with the cicada perfectly preserved inside. I had told him, in some ways, this amber is a prison for the cicada, but a cicada's life above ground is only about 80 days, so perhaps it also gives it a second life. Julian, you can use this amber to make a wish with me someday. Even then, I'd known that Julian would be my prison, but I'd hoped I could find some sort of rebirth through him, so I had given him the amber. Yet, not long after, I'd seen it in Angelica's hands, a toy she casually tossed aside and discarded. I had no idea how Julian managed to find another one exactly like it, the same amber, the same cicada, but no matter how similar it looked, it was no longer the one I'd given him, and Julian knew it. So, with hands shaking, he pressed on, speaking hurriedly before I could respond. I have only one wish. You can use me however you want, even if you use me to make Jack fall for you. I wouldn't mind. As he said that last sentence, his voice broke. It seemed to drain the last of his strength. Chest heaving, Julian's eyes, rimmed red, were filled with a pleading desperation. Please. I looked down at the amber in Julian's hand, holding it gently. In his eyes, I saw a faint glimmer of hope begin to rekindle. But Julian, I sighed. That was just a lie. Whether it was approaching Julian or telling him he could use that amber to make a wish, it was all just a lie. A lie I needed to believe to get home. And besides, Julian, there's really nothing I can use you for. With that, I tossed the amber into the fountain. I watched Julian plunge into the water in a frenzy to retrieve it. Just like that night so long ago. Only this time, it wasn't for Angelica, but for me. You lied to him. The system commented. You didn't really throw away the amber. I chuckled, turning away without hesitation. At the moment I threw it, I had the system replace it with a fake. It's not a lie. I told the system, better to sever all ties than let him keep hoping there's something between us. The system fell silent, then finally said, "You've changed." After a pause, it added, "Given Julian's behavior, your sixth attempt was actually successful. You were right. Not erasing his memories from the previous lives is a worse punishment. It's not just the last life." I corrected. Smiling, he remembers all 6 attempts. That was why Julian had reacted so strongly when I mentioned the clown. The system didn't respond. Chapter 18. Eager to be my model as soon as possible, Jack focused intensely on his recovery, physically and mentally. I took a step back, looking at his increasingly muscular frame, and couldn't help but fall into thought. "Are you judging me?" Jack quickly noticed my expression. "No." I denied it immediately. Jack crossed his arms, scoffing skeptically. It took me a while to express enough appreciation for his physique, even longer to convince him I wasn't just saying it to placate him. Before his pride was fully restored, he was surprisingly easy to please. Easy enough that I sometimes felt Jack was purposely trying to cheer me up. Originally, Jack planned to spend the whole day with me in the studio, but something came up, and he had to leave. Before he went, he gave me a pointed look. "Don't you dare switch models. And especially don't go looking for Julian." Jack's animosity toward Julian was evident, and I knew it was largely because of me. But even so, Jack and I had only known each other for a short time. Pausing with the paintbrush in my hand, I smiled at him and nodded. "All right." Jack looked satisfied and finally left. But soon, I received another uninvited guest, Angelica. Chapter 19. This was my first proper encounter with Angelica in my 7th attempt. Because I knew Julian, I also knew Angelica. The Lee family heiress's skill at feigned kindness was as strong as Julian's. No one knew how she mistreated others because her parents and Julian always covered it up. "So Julian's gone against me repeatedly because of you?" She stared at me, amused. Her gaze fell on the painting I hadn't yet put away, and her pupils shrank, a flash of envy passing through her eyes. But she quickly looked away, scoffing. "It's nothing special." I ignored her and continued packing up my tools. "Julian's always been my loyal little dog," Angelica said, unfazed by my indifference. "But lately, he's been baring his teeth at me for someone else." She paused, an odd smile on her face. "So tell me, what should I do about this dog and the person who stole him?" I zipped up my bag and looked at her calmly. "If he's being disobedient, pull his teeth, cut off his claws, and train him to obey." That's exactly what I thought. Angelica's eyes gleamed with pleasure. She licked her lips, her gaze turning predatory as she looked at me. "And what should I do with the dog thief?" I chuckled softly, glancing at the door where a shadow stood. Perhaps the Lee heiress should be more worried about getting bitten by a dog. Angelica's face twisted in anger. Always quick-tempered, she made to kick over my easel, but she was stopped midway. It was Julian. I hadn't seen him for days, and he looked even thinner. His white shirt hung loosely on his frame. Julian didn't look at me once. His gaze was fixed solely on Angelica. His voice calm. "Shouldn't you be preparing for the competition?" "Oh, right, the competition." Angelica turned to me, eyebrows raised. "I hear you're participating, too, though you're all just fillers. I admit you have some talent." She smirked, but only just a bit. Before I could respond, a voice cut in. "Which dog here drank vinegar? That sour stench is enough to smell from a mile away." It was Jack, who'd returned unexpectedly. Chapter 20. Jack stepped in front of me, sizing up Angelica with a sneer. I was wondering who it was. He drawled. "Just the old witch from the Lee family. Comparing you to a dog is an insult to dogs, they're way cuter." "What did you say?" Angelica looked furious, but she didn't dare make a move. Jack's expression was thunderous. It was the first time I'd seen him with such a menacing aura. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of the future business titan he'd become. Julian stayed motionless. That was, until Jack took my hand, threading his fingers through mine. Julian moved as if to take a step forward but stopped, forcing himself to stare at the ground. I was surprised too, turning to question Jack. I saw him beaming at me. "You're scaring my girlfriend," he said. When he looked back at Angelica, his smile vanished instantly. his expression shifting in an instant. "I've always been a bit rough," he said casually, the threat in his voice unmistakable. Grinning, he glanced toward Angelica and Julian, too, with a hint of challenge. After all, the He family has never been known for playing nice. Angelica trembled with rage. "You wouldn't dare." "Jack, what wouldn't I dare?" Jack cracked his knuckles. "If you lay a finger on my girlfriend." Before he finished, he swung his fist directly at Julian. "Ah!" Angelica screamed, instinctively stepping back. Julian absorbed the punch, but quickly retaliated. They exchanged blows, each punch landing heavily. Before long, they were both bloodied. The noise soon drew others. "Jack!" I called out. "Getting injured isn't a good look." Jack froze, and Julian's fist, aimed at Jack's face, also stopped mid-swing. He looked up at me. All I saw in his eyes was emptiness. Chapter 21. Angelica had fled long ago. Julian stayed behind, quietly tidying up the disordered studio. Jack tried to shoo him away but couldn't make him leave, finally resorting to grumbling under his breath. Yet, when I looked his way, Jack immediately stopped, feigning innocence with a "what are you looking at me for?" expression that was both amusing and endearing. Julian didn't stay long, but just before he left, he turned to me and said, "I'll find it." I ignored him. After he was gone, Jack lingered by my side, then finally couldn't resist asking, "What's he looking for?" "Probably his lost mind," I replied without looking up. Jack snorted in agreement. "Exactly. The Lee family hag insults him like that. And he still likes her? No brain at all. Maybe he's got a condition." "Right." Jack's eyes lit up as he struggled to remember. "There's a name for it. Sparta something? It's Stockholm Syndrome." Jack burst out laughing, and I couldn't help but laugh along. "Jack," I said suddenly, "I've figured out a title for this painting." Before I'd started, Jack and I had debated intensely about what to name my contest piece, but we hadn't reached an agreement. "What is it?" Jack looked up from flipping through my sketchbook, curious. I stepped over to the canvas and, bending down, wrote 2 letters on the white sheet. He. Jack's face froze when he saw those letters. Then, pretending to be nonchalant, he said, "Sounds good. If you like it, that's all that matters." Jack turned his head away, avoiding my gaze, so I reached over, held his face, and repeated softly, "It's he for Jack he." Jack didn't respond, but his ears turned a deep shade of red. And maybe, not just his ears. I chuckled, tapping Jack's now slightly flushed eyes. "Need me to comfort you, crybaby he?" Jack's face turned beet red in an instant, muttering a low curse. He opened his arms with mock composure. "Since you're willing to comfort me, I don't mind lending you my embrace." So I hugged Jack, pretending not to notice the small, hopeful gestures he made. Chapter 22. Spending time with Jack was truly enjoyable. His feelings were direct and passionate, and his bias toward me was plain for all to see. Yet, every time I mischievously pushed his boundaries, his ears would turn red, and he'd suppress his shyness, hoping I'd continue. Jack showed me, through his actions, that he wasn't so unreachable after all. Around him, I could completely be myself. Sometimes, I even felt as if Jack were the one pursuing me, rather than the other way around. But when that thought crept up, another uncomfortable feeling would spread within me, one that was harder to ignore. I knew what it was, so I did my best to overlook it, to treat Jack well, a little better, even better. It felt like each kind gesture might ease the guilt. During this time, Julian didn't seek me out. I'd heard from classmates that he'd finally agreed to model for Angelica. "This is actually a good thing," the system said with a sigh of relief. "Julian won't interfere with you now. You'll complete the mission soon and go home. It's good for everyone." I just smiled, not refuting it. Chapter 23. Before I knew it, competition day arrived. There was no last-minute cancellation from Julian, nor any sabotage from Angelica. Without a doubt, he won first place. Jack was more excited about it than I was. As I made my way down from the stage, I overheard him boastfully telling everyone nearby, "Hey, you know who painted that winning piece? It was me. The he is my name." seeing him grinning and wagging his little curls around. I could almost imagine a tail wagging behind him. I let him go on, bragging to everyone he could find. Then, when he noticed me, he froze, almost swearing in surprise. But Jack quickly swallowed the expletive. Realizing he'd startled me, he gritted his teeth and forced himself to speak softly. "When did you get here?" "Just when you started the second round," the poor guy next to him said with an exasperated sigh. Jack shot him a look, caught red-handed. He looked at me with a mix of feigned innocence and indignation. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" So bold in his shamelessness. I chuckled. "Should I give you a heads up next time? I think that'd be good." Jack pretended to think deeply, then nodded. I was about to tease him when I noticed an unfriendly gaze directed at me. It was Angelica. She snorted when our eyes met, then gathered herself to go on stage for her acceptance speech. And that was when things took an unexpected turn. Chapter 24. I knew Julian was ruthless. His ruthlessness extended not just to others, but also to himself. So when Angelica took the stage, and a video started playing on the screen behind her showing her bullying others, I felt a strange sense of inevitability. This was Julian's signature move: raise someone up to the heights, only to slam them down so hard they could never rise again. It was only when I heard Angelica shout Julian in the video and saw who was in the footage. "Don't look," Jack said instinctively, reaching out to cover my eyes. I heard the tension in his voice and hesitated briefly before gently lowering his hand. I held onto Jack's hand, and he stopped trying to shield me. On stage, chaos erupted. Angelica, for the first time, lost her composure in front of everyone, yelling frantically for someone to turn off the video. Only Julian remained calm, standing amid the crowd. He looked across the chaos at me, mouthing two silent sentences. I understood them. The first was, "See, I still have my uses." The second, "Don't look at me." Julian had lost it. That was the only thought running through my mind. He really had. In front of everyone, he began taking off his clothes piece by piece. The scars on his pale, thin body were stark and jarring. There were knife wounds, cigarette burns. The video could be faked, but the scars were real. Julian stood there, his body a silent testament to Angelica's abuse. Chapter 25. Julian's gaze never left me. His eyes held shame, but more than that, they held a desperate plea. He was begging me not to look at him. I knew how proud Julian was, and how much he cared about his reputation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone to such lengths to erase his past humiliations once he had the power to do so. But now, he had shattered it all with his own hands, standing under the judgmental eyes of strangers, exposing himself like a battered object for everyone to examine and discuss. I'd achieved my goal. I'd made Julian watch as Sophia walked out of that deep abyss named Julian, and I'd made him take each step closer to his own destruction. I should have felt happy, but I wasn't. So I glared at him, resentment and anger bubbling up inside me, until a warm hand covered my eyes. "Don't look anymore," Jack sighed, pulling me into his arms. "There's nothing here worth seeing." He held me tightly, shielding me from the sight, but I didn't cry. Not until I heard the piercing screams, followed by the commotion of the crowd. Jack kept his arms around me. He guided me through the jostling crowd and took me far away from that place. Later, I found out from the news what had happened. In a fit of rage, Angelica had tried to attack Julian with a microphone stand. She'd even carried a small knife. She tried to stab Julian, but he disarmed her with that same knife. Julian crippled Angelica's hand and escaped amidst the chaos. The Lee family, of course, wouldn't let Julian go unpunished. But they wouldn't be able to catch him, because I knew that as long as Julian didn't want to be found, they would never find him. Chapter 26. That night, I had a dream. Or, more accurately, it wasn't a dream at all. I saw Julian hurrying back to the villa after that celebration, only to find my lifeless body. At first, he refused to believe I was gone, so he started tearing up the paintings in my studio, hoping his actions would provoke me, that I would show myself in anger. This frenzied state lasted for several days, until Angelica arrived. "What are you doing?" She looked at him with irritation in her eyes. "She kept pestering you, and now that she's dead, isn't it better?" Julian, I'll be here with you. Only you and I are truly a match. Her voice softened as she crouched down. Trying to calm him, she said, don't destroy her paintings. I still have some use for them. Julian looked at her with an unreadable expression. Then, after a long silence, he rasped, fine. Angelica assumed he had agreed so easily because he loved her. So later, when Julian exposed her, leaving her reputation and life in tatters, Angelica went mad. By then, most of the Lee family company shares were in Julian's hands. You never loved me. Angelica was locked in a basement cell. She glared at Julian with a twisted smile. You just wanted revenge. So you pretended to love me. Does Sophia know? Without waiting for a response, she continued. Oh, she doesn't know. Sophia, that poor girl, poured her heart into you, only to have you destroy her hand and lock her up in that villa. Angelica laughed, a harsh sound filled with venom. Julian, do you think Sophia died hating you? She was trying to provoke him. For Angelica, death might have seemed like a release. So she kept trying to anger Julian, hoping he'd kill her. But her plan didn't work. Such provocations might work on a normal person, but Julian had lost his sanity long ago. He completed his revenge with chilling calm. Then, a few days later, went alone to a temple known for its blessings. Before he left, Julian came to see me. He said he truly loved me. He said he knew why I'd approached him. He said he just didn't want me to leave so soon. I stood there in silence, listening to Julian say things I'd never known. Finally, he told me, Sophia, Jack is looking for you, but I won't give you to him. You're mine. Even if you hate me, resent me, I won't let go. Julian repeated this softly. His voice was calm, but his eyes were lifeless. For the first time, I spoke to the Julian in my dream. I said, Julian, I still don't believe you love me. My grandmother once told me, if love doesn't make the person feel loved, then it isn't love. So, Julian, you don't love me. It was just a dream. Julian couldn't hear me, but after I finished, I watched the calm facade on his face shatter. Bit by bit, he had descended into his own hell. But this time, Sophia wouldn't be there with him. Julian still went to the temple. There were 53 steps leading up to the gate. 53 prayers, each one a plea to the Buddha. Julian had never believed in gods or spirits, but that time, he prayed with every step. And that day, I saw someone else doing the same. Jack. They had no interaction, only moved in silence, performing the same ritual. And when the abbot asked them why they had come, they both gave the same answer. Sophia. Chapter 27. Jack and I officially started dating. Before introducing me to Sandra, he mysteriously retrieved a small black box, insisting I couldn't see it until we met her. All right then, I didn't press him, but that night, I regretted it more times than I could count. Not only was Sandra there, but several other he family members were present too. Jack opened the black box and proceeded to hand out cards to each of them. It's my wife's business card, make sure you keep it safe. Black background, gold letters. Alongside my name, there was an additional line, clearly visible, Jack's beloved wife. He had, indeed, kept his promise. If you like these, I'll print a whole stack for you next time. I stared silently at the card, convinced this was Jack's form of revenge. But when I looked up, I saw him holding the card, grinning like an idiot. It was just a card, but he held it as if it were the entire world. So I softened. Under the curious glances of the He family, I calmly praised Jack. My display of grin and bear it deeply moved them. As we were leaving, Sandra patted my shoulder, her voice solemn. You're a good girl. Sorry you have to put up with him. Jack, who had come to find me, overheard this. He didn't say anything then, but later at home, he put up a massive fuss. Finally, he looked at me with a pout, asking, is it really that bad being with me? No, I answered immediately. Jack kept muttering, but it was clear he was mostly pacified. Maybe this is good. For a fleeting moment, I thought to myself. Chapter 28. I'd completed the mission to win Jack over a while ago. but I kept putting things off until my birthday. Jack must have sensed something because he stuck to me like glue that day. So on my birthday, I bought a bunch of apples and said, "Jack, teach me how to peel an apple." Jack's apple peels were flawless. He seemed surprised but agreed anyway. Unfortunately, I'm not great with my hands, and we went through several apples. When there was only one left, I set the knife down. "Jack." I licked my dry lips and smiled. "I heard that if you make a wish while peeling an apple, and the peel doesn't break, that wish will come true. So, do you have a wish?" Jack paused with the apple, glancing up at me with a raised eyebrow. "Why ask about my wish?" "Because it's my birthday. I already made a wish over the cake." "Well, I'm good at peeling, so I could just make a wish myself," he said, laughing. "It's not the same." I shook my head, smiling. "You're too good at it. If you make too many wishes, they stop working. You see, I haven't managed to get one right." I gestured to the pile of failed apple peels, then held up the last apple with a playful smirk. "So if I manage to get this one right, your wish will definitely come true." "Last apple, huh?" Jack blinked, then clicked his tongue and chuckled. Teasing. "Had I known you'd be this wasteful, I would have bought more." "Make your wish already." "My wish, huh?" Jack rubbed his chin, pretending to think. Then, when I was on the verge of losing patience, he looked at me with a soft smile. "Then I'll make one. I wish for my Sophia to be herself again." It was my turn to freeze. "That's cheating," I mumbled, barely holding back tears. "You were supposed to make a wish for yourself, but that is my wish." Jack sat beside me, his gaze tender. "Sophia, you'll help me make this wish come true, won't you?" My nose tingled as tears welled up. Chapter 29. I peeled the apple with utmost care, but I still ran into a snag. In that instant, I couldn't tell if I felt a wave of relief or something else entirely. And then, Jack took my hand in his. "TSK. I knew you'd be hopeless without me," he said, in his usual proud, playful tone, but I could see his eyes were red. Holding my hand, he guided me through the last steps of peeling the apple. The peel wasn't as smooth or even as when Jack did it alone, but it didn't break. I stared at the apple in my hand, laughing and crying at the same time. The clock ticked closer to midnight. The system's countdown for my departure had begun. I took a shaky breath and suddenly grabbed Jack's hand. "Jack, I have a secret to tell you." "I don't really love you." "I know." Jack's response was calm. He brushed away a tear that had fallen without my noticing, his fingers trembling. "Even though it's not much of a secret, I have one to share with you, too." "What is it?" "In this world, Julian isn't the only special one." As he leaned closer, I caught a glimpse of a card tucked in his breast pocket, a black card with gold letters, "Jack's beloved wife." I opened my mouth, only to find my throat tight with emotion. The system's countdown chimed in my mind, 10, 9. So I forced myself to speak faster. "But I really want to invite you to my world. My grandmother's sugar water is incredibly sweet." Jack couldn't bring himself to say, "I know," because he'd never come to my world, never get to taste the sweetness of my grandmother's sugar water. So he bent down and kissed me gently. "Then I hope I get the chance to try it. Sophia, remember to pay more attention to the people around you. Sometimes, if one path is blocked, choosing another might lead to success. You're such a wonderful person. Someone will come along, just for you." For so long, I'd thought my name symbolized a hard fate, but only Jack ever told me, "No, it's a new beginning, endless cycles, rebirth." It was the rebirth of the cicada. Just then, I noticed Julian standing in the distance. He wore a cap, his face mostly hidden. He was watching me without blinking, yet too afraid to come closer. There were still so many things I wanted to say to Jack, but the system's countdown reached its end. Mission complete, preparing to exit the virtual world. "But Jack, I haven't told you my birthday wish. I wished that I'd see you again, and that I'd have the chance to tell you I truly, deeply love you." In the last second before I lost consciousness, I heard the shrill sound of an alarm. I saw Jack, eyes red, struggling to maintain a smile. He said, "I love you. I love you." And behind him, Julian mouthed the same words silently. Congratulations. Mission successfully completed. Epilogue. I had a long dream. In it, I had just finished my college entrance exams when I was swept into a completely unfamiliar world. There, the only way back was to complete a mission, but I kept failing. Until the 7th attempt, I blinked, feeling dazed. Wait, the 7th time, how did I succeed? Child, take these bowls of sugar water out to the customers. My grandmother's voice called out. I was back home, helping at her sugar water stall for the summer after my exams. Yes, Grandma, I answered, hastily grabbing several bowls. As I stepped out, I nearly tripped over a chair someone had left in the way, but instead of the expected pain, I fell into a warm embrace. Above me, a familiar yet distant voice said, I knew you'd be hopeless without me. The same cocky, proud tone as always. I looked up, tears streaming down my face before I even realized it. Why are you crying? He fumbled to wipe my tears, though he was crying harder than I was. I came specifically to see how sweet your grandmother's sugar water is. Oh, and one with extra sugar. Please. My sister has a major sweet tooth. Snapping back to reality, I reached out my hand to him. Jack, can I touch your hair? It was something I'd wanted to do for so long but never got the chance. Jack blinked. He muttered, touching my hair will stunt my growth. But he took the tray from me, lowering his head slightly. Amid the customers' cheerful laughs and encouragement, I finally got to ruffle that head of red curls. Then I looked him in the eyes and told him, Jack, I really, truly, deeply love you. So, welcome to my world, Jack. Ding! World fusion complete. Final reward granted. We hope you'll give us a 5-star rating.